This cake recipe was in the October issue of Woman's Weekly magazine, but is also on the Good to Know website. And it's a rich fruit cake with lots of currants, sultanas and cherries in it. The cake, when we baked it, has got a nice level surface, but just to make sure that the cake will be really flat when I ice it, I'm going to turn it upside down, and now the surface will be perfectly smooth. When the cake was baked, I put some brandy on it when it came out of the oven, but I like to put on a little bit more just before I ice it as well, just to make sure it's really moist. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the cake in marzipan and white sugar paste. So to stick the marzipan on, I'm going to use some apricot baking glaze. If you don't have the baking glaze, you can use ordinary apricot jam and then sieve it before you use it so that it's nice and smooth. But the apricot glaze you can use straight from the pot. And I'm going to spread it over the top and the sides of the cake. And the marzipan that I'm using and the sugar paste are ready-made products. I find it's a lot better and more reliable and more consistent to use it ready-made rather than making it myself. So to save time, I've got some that I've already kneaded. And all the time I'm not using it, you'll notice I keep it wrapped in a plastic bag so that it won't dry out. So just work it to make sure it is nice and smooth. Make sure there's no crumbs on the worktop. And then dust over a little icing sugar. Now what I want to do is I want to roll it out so that it's a circle that would be big enough to cover the top and sides of the cake. And just add a little bit more icing sugar below it and on top of it to make sure that it isn't sticking. And then I'm going to lift the marzipan and rest it over the cake. Now, firstly, I'm making sure that there's no air trapped underneath on the top, and then I'm going to work around the sides, pressing it into the base. So now that I've covered the top and the sides, I need to trim away this excess. And the first cut that I do is sort of a little bit rough, just to get away the bulk of it. And then I can go around a second time and cut it more neatly. To get an even smoother surface, what you can do is you can use a plastic smoother on it. Either one of these that comes with a handle to rub over the top and the sides, or something that gives equally good results is just to use a thin plastic side scraper, which also works quite well. And will make sure that the sides are nice and straight. And then one final thing is just to rub over the top edge of it. I use that part of my hand between my thumb and my finger, just to make it a nice curve. Now the next thing I'm doing is I'm softening the sugar paste that I'm going to use to cover the cake. Now I've just rolled it out on the work surface as it is, not adding any icing sugar at this stage, because if you're kneading it and using icing sugar, you're going to make it dry. But now it's ready to roll out. I'm going to dust some icing sugar onto the table and on the top of it. Now it's easiest to get rid of the air bubbles while the sugar paste is still on the table before you put it on the cake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pin and pierce it at one side and then press out the air. And the same on the other one. And to stick it onto the cake, what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush some water over the marzipan. So I'm going to lift the sugar paste and rest it over the top of the marzipan. Make sure that there's no air trapped between the sugar paste and the marzipan. And then, just as the marzipan was put on, the sugar paste is the same. You press it in, easing in any of the fullness. And I'm going to use a small knife to cut around the bottom. When I'm doing this, I'm taking care not to cut the actual cake board itself. Otherwise, you'll find that the silver colour starts to rub off the cake board and will get into the icing. And if you want a really good surface on this cake, the smoother can be used as well. Oops, this one is sticking a little bit. I'm going to put some icing sugar on it just because that will help stop it sticking. Okay, so that's the top and the sides, and then the top edge. So So that gives me my finished iced cake. To pattern around the top edge, I'm going to use the crimpers, which are like tweezers that you press together and they will pattern the icing. And it's a way to give a decorative finish to a cake without having to mix up any royal icing and doing any piping. To finish the cake and add some colour, I'm going to put a ribbon around the cake, which I've cut to length so the ends will just overlap, and I've put some double-sided sticky tape on it so that they should overlap and stick together. And that's the cake, ready to put some decoration on the top. One very quick idea for decorating a Christmas cake is to make Christmas trees out of green sugar paste. And to make the Christmas tree, what I'm doing is I'm working it into a cone shape. It doesn't have to be too even, that's neat enough. And then to help it while I cut it, to help support it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on a chopstick. And what I'm using is a pair of fine embroidery scissors, and I'm using the tips of them to make lots of little cuts around the tree. Okay, so once you've cut all the way around it, slide out the support, and that's a Christmas tree. You can make the trees in different sizes so that they're different heights to go on the cake. And to stick them to the cake, all you need to do is to brush a little bit of water onto the base of them and then position them in place. Now what I'm using for painting the water is a special water brush where you fill the handle of it with water and then the water will come out through the bristles. This is a little gadget I find really useful for cake decorating, but it's not essential. You can just use an ordinary paintbrush and then use some water on the bottom. And for a final finishing touch, I'm going to dust a little bit of snow over the top of the trees. And that's my finished Christmas cake.